Hi guys! So you'll want to have your notebook open somewhere where you can access it. We are going to go over the picture that we have there of the plasma membrane and the parts of the plasma membrane. It's okay if you can't have this video and your notebook open at the same time. Not a problem. You can always pause it, go do something in your notebook, and then come back to the video. We're going to look at these two I can statements, so identifying the parts of the cell membrane and summarizing ways those parts help the cell membrane function in cells. I like to start by telling students to think about the cell as an orange. And if I were to cut inside the orange, the plasma membrane or the cell membrane is that outside part that you peel off, that white part that you peel off of the orange. So thinking about that analogy, if we took that little piece on the outside of the orange and we blew it up, and maybe over here this is the outside of the orange and this is the inside of the orange, and this is our outer covering. Just a little segment of our outer covering. So that's what our plasma membrane is like. It surrounds the cell, and we've taken a piece of it and we've blown it up, and we're looking at all of the individual parts. Okay, so from previous lessons, the Explore you did, the video you just watched, we know that the plasma membrane helps regulate what enters and leaves a cell. And that a lot of times is based on the size of the molecule or the charge, whether it can get across the phospholipid bilayer. We know that there are proteins that help larger molecules or charged molecules get across the membrane. So we're going to look at the individual parts of the membrane and look at the function they serve. So the first one I have up there, circled in purple, is one phospholipid. And we saw in the video that the inside here, the tails of the phospholipids are hydrophobic. And if you did your, if you've already done your vocabulary, you know that that means that it repels water or is not attracted to water. And the outside here is hydrophilic, attracted to water. And we saw that cells live in a concentration of water, right? They're always in some sort of solution. So it's important that we have that hydrophobic inside of the phospholipid bilayer and the hydrophilic outside, because it's existing in that water, but we don't want the plasma membrane to dissolve into the water and our cell basically fall apart. So let's label that phospholipid. If you go down to the slide right below it in your notebooks, I've already got it here for you. You can highlight it, Control C or right click and copy, come up here and paste it, Control V. So we know that the heads of the phospholipid attract water and the nonpolar tails repel water. If you are using a paper version of the notebook, you can just go ahead and write it in there. Okay, so, for the next part of the membrane we have here, color-coded, is a large protein. And this protein goes all the way through the membrane, so we would call it an integral protein. It goes from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell. And a lot of times these proteins are channels for larger molecules or charged molecules to get through the cell membrane. For example, glucose. It has to get to your mitochondria, so you can break it down for energy. Comes from your digestive system, moves through the bloodstream, but it's way too big to fit through those phospholipids. So you have a specific protein that aids glucose in getting across the cell membrane. So this is an integral protein. And if we go down, we can put that in the box up here. So it can act as a channel for materials to move in and out of the cell, right? We know that the plasma membrane is selectively permeable, lets certain things in, but not others. So those two, phospholipids and integral proteins, help the plasma membrane perform that function. Okay, so the next two are oftentimes related. We have another protein. It's not moving, it does not move all the way through the plasma membrane, so it is a peripheral protein. It's on the periphery or the outside of the membrane. And then down below it, we have another peripheral protein, but it's attached to a carbohydrate. So that would be a glycoprotein. Peripheral proteins can aid in cell-to-cell communication. For example, thinking about the glucose we just talked about with the integral protein. When we are talking about biomolecules, we talked about insulin being a hormone that tells your cells to take up glucose and store it. That hormone that travels through your bloodstream has a specific protein on the outside of the plasma membrane that it attaches to, and that's how it tells your cells to open up those glucose channels and store glucose. So that's a peripheral protein. If we go down to our second slide, we can pull the name and definition for peripheral protein, copy that, put it in our green box for peripheral protein, used for cell-to-cell communication. And then related to that is a carbohydrate. So this aids in cell-to-cell recognition, so you recognizing cells and cells basically sticking together. Thinking about, example of that is your blood type, ABO or AB. That's related to the carbohydrates or glycoproteins on your red blood cells, and your body being able to recognize those as yours. So carbohydrates here on the cell membrane, copy. We can put that in our blue box to go along with the blue carbohydrate here. And then lastly down here we have a cholesterol molecule moving into the plasma membrane. I like to tell students to think about these as cracks in the sidewalk. When people are pouring concrete, they don't just pour one big slab of concrete. They put cracks inside of that concrete to help with the fluidity of the concrete. So those cholesterol do the same thing. They prevent those phospholipids from sticking and keep it fluid. Okay, so you should have this filled out in your notebook. You could always use this second page here to study, right, to think about what those look like in the cell membrane, or you can delete this page if you want to. Make sure you've added these to your notebook. So what happened to that celery in the first slide? So when we put the celery inside the purple food coloring, the water with purple food coloring, that water was pulled up the stalk of the celery, moving across, as you can see right here, moving across the plasma membrane of every cell. And water actually moves in a specific, it's a specific structure in plants called the xylem. But the xylem is made up of individual cells, so it has to move across the plasma membrane of all those cells until it gets to the leaves. And through transpiration, when water molecules evaporate from the leaves through openings in the leaves of cells, it actually pulls up another water molecule so that that water is constantly moving up the stem and to the leaves of cells. Of plants. So the last thing I want you to do is go back to that celery demo and think about your thinking in the next slide and add that in there. And finally, your assignment is on the last slide to turn into Canvas. Make sure you choose only one, or if you have another idea, you let me know. Reach out with any questions, and I'll see you guys the next time.